All right, next thing that I need to do now that I've gotten all of the various pieces into my shirt is attach the binding, and I'll be putting binding at the top and then another piece of binding all the way down at the bottom. But the top is the one that involves a little bit of extra. So I'm going to pick the smoothest side, go ahead and take off this little tail there, and then I am going to go ahead and mark this with a pin right in the middle. Unlike the sleeve, I'm not going to do the marking in the quarters because I don't really have a convenient quarter spot on this one. I mean, I kind of do, right? If I fold it here, we can see that okay, sure, I'll do the quarters. So we can see that the seam for the shoulder wing is at the quarter roughly. But that isn't always the case. It kind of depends a little bit on how much seam allowance you had, etc. So if I go ahead and put in the quarter marks here, then it just ensures that I get it put on smoothly. Again, this is a bias cut piece of fabric, and this neck opening is also definitely on the bias. So I should be able to match them up in a pretty straightforward manner. To make sure that I have the seam, there it is, so this is pointing to the inside, so I have the face touching the face, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in all the way around. In this case, the center is the spot where I have the two side pieces meet, and I'm putting pins in such a way that I get the flaps held down, because that's always a risk as you're sewing along. And in some cases, I need to make sure that I'm not pinning them at an awkward angle, right? So I don't want to, you know, like immortalize some kind of wrinkle, right? So I need to make sure that I stitch it in such a way that that the seam really is at the angle that it's meant to be at. And so even though I'm holding the flap down, I'm going to put the pin so that it follows the seam. And come all the way around here. Now I have enough experience that I'll be able to use my fingers to really stretch this out, but if this is your first time doing it, I recommend that you just get out all your pins and go ahead and pin it 2 or 3 times between each of the quarter pins. And that way you don't end up accidentally having your facing wandering up, or your the body of your shirt wandering up, right? That the two are matched all the way around. But this is easier to match than doing the gather bit inside the sleeve, because as I mentioned before, this neckline opening is also on the bias. So they're both going to stretch a bit, and the only issue is just to make sure that you stretch them evenly so that it will be nice and smooth. Okay. And then again, I'm going to give myself that 1/2 inch seam allowance because my binding is 2 inches wide, and I'm going to pause it here and come back after I stitch this so that you can see how it goes with the ironing. And so I'm going to check, as I take the pins out, that I actually succeeded. So I thought I had a little wrinkle stitched in there, but I can actually pull that out with my fingernail. And I've got all the flaps pointing in the right direction. I would correct it, so I would actually use my seam ripper to lift it up and re-stitch it, because it is really important that I have a nice smooth look. And I'll show you how we can double check that we have a nice smooth look as we iron it. All right, so now when I'm ironing it, it is of course a curved shape, and so I want to go ahead and iron it with the curve. And so I did put this to the wrong direction. Let's just double check and see. Yeah, so you remember that I said that this needed to point up, right? So that, right? But I didn't do that on this one here. And so in fact, I do need to rip it out and fix it. And so I would just go in right here, lift that up, point it in the opposite direction, pin it in. And actually, while I'm here, so this was partly my fault because I must not have ironed this piece before. And so you can see that I actually also need to right, make sure that I get that smoothly done, right, so that it will point in the right direction. Okay, so I fixed it, and now when I'm going through and ironing it, all right, then that will lay down smoothly. And I want to make sure that I'm really pulling this tight because I need to get this edge here to be as smooth as possible so that I can do the next step. Right, and so I don't even mind if I have a little bit of wrinkles in the bias on the inside, right, because my goal is to, I'm going to do what's called the stitching in the ditch right there, and so I need to get the ditch as flat as possible. Great, and now if I were, and I probably will because I'm showing it to you, so if I were not in a hurry and I really wanted to be careful, then I would actually go ahead and iron this down. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, right, because I really want to be sure I have enough. So I'm going to leave a little gap between these two right there. And again, this is where it's really helpful that I know that I have a 2-inch wide binding and that I was careful to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the reason that that matters is because now when I fold this down, so when I fold it right down that 1/2 inch seam allowance, I still have a little bit peeking up. And so maybe I wasn't super careful about making sure that was a 1/2 inch, or, you know, maybe I need to make sure that when I pull it down, I can feel a tiny bit curling over the edge there, right? And so I might trim that a little bit off, right? And again, this is what we would do if we were really definitely double checking, right? Or I can just sort of smear it down and know that it'll be a tiny bit thick at the top. But if that continues to be an issue, the best way to solve it would be to just make sure that I have an even bigger gap between the two. And so that when I pull it down, right, I then don't have that issue. And I can even go ahead and press it, although I'm not going to depend on that pressing. I'm absolutely going to do my pinning, where I put the pin next to the ditch and see that the pin comes into the body of the bias, right? So I'm going to do that. And then, of course, that thing that I showed you earlier with feeling it with my fingernail right there to feel that I can detect that from the other side. All right, and so I'm going to stitch that all the way around, and then I will orient the camera so that you can actually watch me doing the stitching. All right, and so here's where it can be really useful because I can double check and see that my pins are tucked into the edge of the binding, and that when I look on this side, the pins are to the body side of the bias binding. All right, so then I'm gonna do this stitch in the ditch, and all right, got off to a little bit of a rocky start there, but the goal is to put the stitches not onto the bias, not too far into the, you can see it's kind of sounding kind of gummy. You can hear that. And so I'm going to pull back the, I think the needle might be getting a little bit dull. And so I just tapped to put the the stitch down. So you can see there that when I went over that pin, it kind of got a little bit to the side, but it is still actually catching, and you can see right in there. Then I got kind of a little bit wobbly, but the nice thing about that spot is that it will be hidden in the center front seam. And I don't believe in being too much of a perfectionist. I think that it's obviously good to, you can see with my fingernail there, I'm just double checking. I think that it can be good to practice a number of times and make sure that you like the result you're getting. But if you slow down a little bit and pay attention, that can be valuable. But if you are really trying on your first 2 tries to have it be as perfect as it would be for somebody who'd done it 90 times, right, then you know, that's not actually possible. And so you need to give yourself a little bit of grace, and also remember that most people are just going to be so dead impressed that you're wearing something that you made, using design choices that you made, right, the color selections, all of that, that they're not going to stop and look in close at your neckline and say, you know, oh look, you came out of the ditch and grabbed the binding. But this is one reason to make sure that the thread color that you use, unless you're feeling really bold and actually really do want a contrasting stitch, that you choose a color that will look good if it strays onto the binding a bit. And you can see that this part of the experience goes on for a while, and you know, there, see, I did wander onto the binding there. The most stressful part, and it was when I was thinking of the words, the most stressful part, for me, the most stressful part of this whole experience is the sleeves. And I took that pin out because I realized that if I put my needle down there, you can see that I realized that I hadn't ironed that out quite fully. The most stressful part of this whole thing is, for me, is putting the sleeves on. And so I would have to say this is probably the second most stressful. And see, I knew something wasn't quite going right there, so I'll have to stop and figure it out. You can see the tip of the needle is actually kind of bent. So something was wrong this whole time. So let's have the gentle exploration that's important to have. When I try to turn this, I can't pull it up all the way, but instead of, you know, trying to break it, I'm going to go with the next step, which is to pop out my bobbin casing. And then I know that I could just tear it with my hands, but I'll take it out with my scissors. And then really get down in there and see, but usually the thing that we'll have to do, because probably the thread has gotten caught back in there, right, and just taking out the bobbin casing didn't free the needle, right, and so I'm going to have to remove this bit here, and so we can see that it's, right, that it doesn't just fall out freely, that it is hung up. But when I do that, I am able to lift the needle out of the way and take this out. Double check that I have no threads in there. The really important reason to not just tug and tug is because that little tip right there, if that gets snapped off, then you have to replace this entire case here, and that's expensive. We can kind of see what happened here. Do you see how the thread is wrapped around the needle? Yeah, so at some point, probably when I first started, the thread was wrapped around the needle and it did its best that whole time. But whenever you're having problems like this, the very best thing to do is to actually just to remove all the thread and rethread the entire machine. Put it all back together carefully. Alrighty, so I took some time to rethread my machine, and so I can see a few spots where it isn't perfect, but the important thing is in the spots where it isn't perfect, did I catch the edge? And so I will go back and restitch right through there. And let's see, everywhere else that caught the edge all the way through, and it looks good on this side. So it's just in this spot right here where I started having the trouble with the threading on the machine. And in fact, in this case, it is worth it to go ahead and just remove these stitches so that I can have it really be as nice and smooth as it should be. Right, and so I'll go ahead and take these out and trim this back right to the nub and then start. Yep, that's right where I jumped up because of the threading. So I'll redo that one, but all of the rest of these look good. And I think that's one of the big messages with learning how to sew and picking something that you can sew over and over so that you can get really comfortable with the techniques that are used in making it, and that way you can just remain calm and or walk away and come back another time if you need to redo something, but it's just a machine and these things happen. And so I'm going to go ahead and restitch that bit and I'll be done with this part. All right, and there we go. And now I'm just going to trim off that little bit of extra where it overlapped, right, and take off that little bit on the inside where it overlapped. And I think the important lesson is don't, if something feels wrong, like in the vibrations of the machine, don't ignore that. It could be that there's something wrong.